Hello, and welcome back to another chapter of It Hurts the Hope by Inquilatory on the AO3. Chapter 26 Collisions. Etho can't sleep. He doesn't really need sleep, honestly, but after so long of being on Hermitcraft, he's grown somewhat accustomed to player habits. It's not being able to drop into slumber is odd and jarring. He even downs a slowness potion in the hopes that it will help him quiet his racing thoughts. But he can't. Ever since he woke up earlier in the night with all of his senses screaming, telling him there was something wrong and something other in the void, getting even closer to his home. He messaged Exuma immediately, only to receive no reply, which meant the next half hour was spent pacing the length of his room, running a hand through his hair and desperately trying to tell himself that they'd be okay. Exuma's story is his own, and Etho has no right to go digging, but he knows someone who's been void touched when he sees them. And the universe left its marks on Exuma. He knows the admin is an old player, though not as old as Etho, and he's a powerful one as well. There's no better player to take care of Hermitcraft. Etho knows that. And yet, he still worries. The sun has already started to inch into the sky when Etho's comm pings. He almost drops it in his rush to open the message tab. Exuma Void. We're okay. Ethos Lab. What happened? Exuma Void. I'm not really sure, but we had too many close calls, I think. Ethos Lab. Is G okay? Exuma Void. Yes. Get some sleep. We'll talk in the morning. Etho almost wants to argue. How can he fall asleep with this unknowing that's itching at his skin? But then he remembers the duel, and he realizes that Exuma must be exhausted. He was already low energy, and then the Watchers coming? He can hold out until morning, or technically afternoon. He amends with a glance out the window, but either way, he can wait until his admin is ready. Tossing the comm aside, Etho sighs and falls back onto the bed, covering his eyes with a hand. He's not really tired, but maybe he can rest a little, then go meet with Exuma. He's asleep before he can finish the thought. Green wakes up in a place that feels like home. It's not his nest, he can tell that immediately. It's all wrong in the shape, and it's missing his blankets and stolen clothes. But it's warm and comfy, and for a long moment he simply hums happily, and snuggles further into the blankets. There's a soft laugh somewhere next to him, and Green realizes that he's not alone in the room. He blinks open bleary eyes and meets Corrales' gaze, the other player sitting in the armchair across from the couch Green finds himself on. Good morning, sweet face, Corrales hums quietly. How are you feeling? Green stretches and yawns, rubbing at his eyes and trying to get his brain to work a little faster. Okay, he says, and tries to continue, but Corrales holds a finger to his lips and points to the other side of the couch. Exuma is slumped, dead asleep across the other end of the couch. He's missing his armor and his helmet, and he's dressed in a dark t-shirt and some kind of pajama pants. A blanket covers most of his shoulders and lap. It almost feels wrong to see him like this. Green can't help but think, the shattering scars so visible as they trail up his bare arms and disappear under his sleeves. He averts his gaze quickly, feeling like he's seeing something he shouldn't. Krause gives him an understanding smile. Is he okay? Green whispers, and he can't help but glance over at the admin again. He's not wearing his helmet. Can he breathe all right? Shishwami sets the controls in his base, so he doesn't have to wear it, Corrales explains. I can breathe end air just fine, and I'm using a little bit of my magic to help you breathe. Now that he's mentioned it, Green can just barely feel Corrales' magic around him, somehow pushing back the void air and filling the space with breathable oxygen instead. It's a gentle kind of magic that is almost not there, subtle and cautious. Thank you, he says quietly, and Corrales simply nods and slides over a glass of water. Shashwami was still trying to dig through the code after you fell asleep, he says with a fond smile as Green drains the glass. It was a busy night. I'm glad he finally slept too. Did he figure her out? Green can't help but ask, risking another glance at Exuma. How they knew where to look? Because it's obvious now that even though the Watchers didn't find Hermitcraft, they know the general direction, and Green knows, somehow, that was his fault. Corrales purses his lips and looks over at Exuma, then back at Green. I think I'll leave that for Shashwami to explain, he says. And I think Etho wants to talk to you as well. He's very knowledgeable, our Etho. Very smart. Admittedly, Green hasn't talked to Etho much. He knows him enough at this point to not fear him, and that he's not usually in the business of tracking down hackers. But they really cross paths. He wonders if Etho's knowledge has anything to do with his obvious inhumanness, but knows it would be rude to ask. Corrales gets up at one point to go make some breakfast, and Green slips back into a half doze. He's woken by Exuma stirring, the admin making a small noise of confusion as he blinks open bleary eyes and looks around the room. Corrales? He mumbles. Then he realizes that Green is sitting on the other end of the couch. Oh, hello, you. Green returns the sleep-heavy smile and averts his gaze slightly as Exuma sits up, the blanket falling from his shoulders. It's stupid. Really? There's nothing awkward about the situation. Exuma's still dressed in his shirt and baggy pants, but he can't help feeling like he shouldn't be looking. What? Oh. Exuma laughs softly and runs a hand through his hair. Is it short or long? What shade of color is that? God damn it, Green, you're doing it again. Corrales? Corrales. Green confirms, right as the man of the hour himself walks back in, carrying a tray piled with a delicious breakfast. Good morning, Shashwami. Corrales sings songs, placing the tray on the table and sitting down between Green and Exuma. The couch is big enough for all three of them, but Corrales seems to do his best to sit down in a way that he can bump his shoulder against Green's and his leg against Exuma's. Morning. Exuma hums back and laughs again as he sees the spread. Kate, you really didn't have to. Nope, Corrales says, putting a finger on Exuma's lips and making him fall silent. No protesting. I made you a nice breakfast, and you will eat it. Exuma repeats with an eye roll, but he smiles from behind Corrales' shushing gesture. Corrales hums happily and turns back to the tray. Green looks over his back and gives Exuma a wide-eyed stare. Exuma shrugs and makes a face back. I saw that, Corrales says, and they both freeze, then burst out laughing. Green accepts his plate and cup without protest, but his laughter dies down as the memories of last night start to set back in again. The other two come as well, sensing the shift in attitude. Corrales pours himself and Exuma a cup of tea, then shifts back to sit against the couch. They're both willing to wait as long as he needs. Admittedly, he needs a bit. He eats his food and mulls it over, forcing his wings not to tense up when he thinks about last night, hiding and calling Izuma, pleading for help like there was anything he could do. It all feels like a dream now, but he knows this isn't a nightmare that can be escaped by waking up. The Watchers are still out there. "You brought me back?" he finally asks. And even though it's several minutes later and out of context, Exuma understands the question. "I did. I managed to lock onto your code and pull you back to Hermitcraft before the Watchers could get to you. I won't lie to you, G. It was pretty close." Oh, he knows it was pretty close. He could feel their angry eyes on him, hear their shouts as he was yanked out of their grasp yet again, the void suffocating him even without the tears in the throat. Corellis is humming quietly. It's not a song he recognizes, something slow and haunting that almost sounds like a lullaby. But it helps him come back to earth, and he blinks a few times to clear the memories. "I know," he murmurs, and leans forward to gently set his plate on the coffee table. "Thank you." "I'm just glad you're okay." "Exuma, you saved my life," Green replies, shooting the admin a flat stare. "Accept the thanks." Exuma rubs a hand along the back of his neck and laughs softly, but finally dips his head in acquiescence. Green leans back satisfied. "How did they find me?" Green asks, and Exuma winces. He fiddles with the cup in his hands for a long moment, and Corellis leans in to gently bump their shoulders together. "They tracked you," Exuma says quietly. "I'm not entirely sure how, but I suspect you might be leaving behind some kind of trail, one that they can detect. I contacted Scott last night, and he said something triggered MCC's defenses. That's the only place you've been other than Hermitcraft in the last 2 months or so." "That and Ivamir," Grian mumbles, and immediately feels terrible. Really, he's an idiot. Why didn't he think of that? Obviously, the Watchers have a way of finding each other. Obviously, they have a way of ensuring they couldn't lose their precious experiment. And Green, like an idiot, fled from the one place he was safe and escaped to the one where he'd been found. "You didn't know that they'd find you?" Exuma says, reaching over to grasp Green's hand in his own. The touch of skin against skin only elevates his distress. He must have dragged Exuma straight out of bed last night. "Your avian instincts flared up, and the only thing you could concentrate on was getting away. You probably weren't even thinking rationally in that moment." Not thinking rationally is probably the best way he could describe the half-awake panic he'd been in last night. The full body terror, the feeling of eyes on his spine, Mumbo's terrified face that only added to the confusion. "Oh my God," Green breathes, and they both fix him with a concerned stare. "I left Mumbo like that." "Mumbo's alright." Exuma rushes to reassure him. He called Iskall over. Stars knows he was probably awake anyways. "He messaged me sometime after I got you back. Mumbo is perfectly alright. Worried for you, of course." But Iskall managed to calm him down. It doesn't really do anything to make Green feel better, especially since "managed to calm him down" implies that he had to be calmed down. And there's only one factor that could have caused that. Watching his friend disappear right in front of his eyes. "I'm a horrible person," he groans, and covers his face in his hands. A hand gently pats him on the back. Corellis. "At least you're referring to yourself as a person now," Corellis says cheerfully. And Exuma coughs out a surprised laugh. "Don't worry, Brian. It's all okay. You can't be blamed for your instincts. It makes him feel a little better, enough to peek through his fingers and shoot Corrales a skeptical look. Brian? He echoes, and Exuma's disguised laughs turns into real ones. He gives nicknames to everyone. You get used to it. You love my nicknames, don't deny it. Corrales shoots back. Exuma sighs and gives Green a look that clearly says, "See what I have to put up with?" Green laughs. It cuts off when there's a knock on the door. He immediately draws his wings close, glancing around and noting that the windows that he'll be able to fit through, maybe he can grab that broom leaning in the corner and... "Come on in, Etho," Exuma calls, and Green freezes, flushing when he realizes what he was just thinking. He's safe now. He's on Hermitcraft. And it's stupid to think that the next person who walks through the door is going to be some kind of interdimensional being. Well, Etho walks through the door, so he supposes that statement has some semblance of truth to it. Etho isn't really sure what to expect when arriving in Exuma's space, but this certainly isn't it. Despite the fact that he's never been the best about his appearance, he's much more put together than the motley crew already assembled in the room. Exuma in a plain shirt and sweatpants without a piece of armor in sight. Green is in a messy, wrinkled sweater thrown over pajamas. Corrales with an outfit that was obviously chosen blindly and in a rush. If there's anything to be assumed from the mismatch of colors and design. Compared to them, Etho looks almost formal in his fluffy jacket and black jeans. There is a skewedness to his mask and a tangle to his hair that implies his night was just as troubled as the others. But overall, it's clear he's spent more time getting dressed than the rest of them put together. "Hey," he says by way of greeting, eyes flashing over the group already gathered. "Glad you're okay, G." Green gives him a slight nod and a hesitant smile, which Etho returns. He crosses over and sinks down into one of the armchairs, not wanting to intrude by trying to squeeze onto the couch, even if it would mean avoiding eye contact for the most part. "So, do I finally get to know what happened?" Etho asks. And he tries to inject some humor into his words because everyone looks nervous about this. Who knew he'd be the one trying to lighten the mood? "The Watchers have a way to track me," Green says bluntly. The words are almost too much a surprise as the person speaking them. Etho didn't expect him to be the first to volunteer. "I see," Etho replies, though he really doesn't. "Does that mean they can find us?" Obviously not, since they're currently having a civil discussion instead of panicking like headless chickens. But he has to ask anyways. Exuma is the one to answer this, shaking his head so quickly he almost spills his tea. "No, we're so hidden at this point, I doubt they'll be able to do anything but catch a faint whiff," he explains, and Etho keeps his eyes trained on the teacup, finding the experience of being able to see the admin's face strange and unwelcome. He's no stranger to Exuma's feature. They've known each other too long for that to be a mystery. But he's more used to the helmet than the man at this point. "Admittedly, I was hoping it wouldn't come to this point," Exuma admits, and Etho can hear the frown in his face. The server is so cloaked now that even hermits are going to have a hard time getting back on, which isn't a risk I'm happy with. But, Exuma stresses, cutting off Green and holding up a finger, It's a risk I'm willing and ready to take. In order to ensure the safety of one of my players, we can handle some code interruptions. Gee, you're not going back to them. Green's face twists, and for a moment Ethan is sure he's going to argue, but he simply nods and settles back down, which is yet another surprise in this conversation. They talk about it for a bit longer. Etho gets a rundown of the night that is very vague and cut short, when Green starts to shake slightly, and finally end off with the impossible question of, what next? It's dead silent. Etho risks a glance at Exuma's face and sees his eyebrows scrunched together, deep in thought. His fingers are idly tapping out a rhythm on the armrest, and Etho notices for the first time that there's a faint shard-like scars that trail up the admin's arm. He looks away again. Exuma's scars are his business and his story. It's obvious he doesn't want to talk about them. Etho can understand that. He doesn't want to talk about his own either. There's not much we can do, Green finally murmurs, and again, it's shocking that he's the driving force in this conversation. Etho was struck all over again with the realization that he's grown so much since he first came onto the server. So different from the scared, half-wild watcher that they held prisoner. I mean, we're at a stalemate, really, Green continues, and there's something weary and hurting in his tone. They can't find me, but I can't leave Hermitcraft. And we all know they're not going to give up anytime soon. So stalemate. I'm stuck, they're stuck. And at some point something is going to shift. Something is going to break. No one really knows what to say to that. They sit in uncomfortable silence what feels like for an eternity. But is probably only a few minutes, until Etho finally clears his throat and shifts in his seat. Well, this feels like an awful timing considering what's happening, he begins, and everyone turns to look at him with varying levels of confusion. But I was planning on talking to you, Exuma. I wanted to give you a heads up, but it's around that time of the month, and I was planning on taking a little trip. He trails off, uncertain how to continue, but Exuma seems to catch on and nods, understanding, lighting up in his eyes. You're single player, he says, and Etho confirms with a dip of his head. Yeah, of course, I should have thought. You're probably the best equipped hermit to lead the server right now, if I'll be honest. You'll have no trouble finding your way back, I trust. Nope. Okay. Exuma buries his face in his hands for a moment, less from being upset and more because he just needs a moment to think. He looks back up at Etho. That's fine, but I want you to keep your off-world communication system open at all times, and if anything happens, or you hear anything from me, I want you back here as fast as possible. Understood? Absolutely, yes, sir. Etho replies, and Corrales giggles. Exuma huffs out an exasperated laugh, but smiles as well. He stands up and offers a hand to Etho, who grasps it and rises to his feet. Green scrambles up a second later, wings flying wide and nearly catching Corrales in the face. Etho! Green blurts out, and before Etho can react or reply, there's a small form suddenly attached to his front, wrapping short but oddly strong arms around his chest. Etho freezes, unsure of what to do as Green hugs him, hiding his face in his jacket. Stay safe, Green mumbles, and Etho awkwardly pats him on the back. He won't admit it, but he's rather touched. He promises to himself that when he gets back, he'll try and spend more time with Green. He thinks they'll get along rather well. The moment is somewhat ruined when Corrales makes a cooing sound and then immediately joins into the hug, overpowering them both with his enthusiastic grip. Exuma manages to evade Corrales' attempt to drag him into the embrace, but he's laughing the entire time. Okay, Etho says, trying to squirm his way out of the hug. He's not big on physical contact, and this is way too long. Thankfully, Green seems to understand his discomfort and immediately lets him go and steps back. Etho could have sworn that Green's eyes flashed purple for a moment, but perhaps it's just the light. Corrales and Green stay behind to clean up the dishes, while Exuma sees Etho to the door. It's obvious that the admin is still tired out and low energy from the feats he performed last night, but he seems a little stronger and standing taller with a sharp gleam in his eye. If anything at all happens, I want you to get back as quick as you can, Exuma says, stopping by the door and putting a hand on the knob. I know you can take care of yourself, but oh goodness, just be careful, Etho, yeah? I always am, Etho says, and gives his admin a little two-finger salute. He's pretty sure a hug would be jarring for both of them. Exuma smiles and mirrors the gesture. I know, he says, and it sounds more sad than knowing. Etho slips out the door and tries not to think about that on his way back to his base. Etho's single player is a private affair. He shares his redstone experiments with other players in online forums when he can, but he really talks about the more personal things on his world. It's just as much as home as Hermitcraft is, and to share it with strangers feels intrusive. He doesn't like the thought. It's quite an old world, all things considered, older than Hermitcraft even, and that's really saying something considering Hermitcraft is on its 5th season. It's gotten a lot bigger since its heyday, but Ethan knows every rock and twig and river. It's his in a way nothing else really is. So it's horrible when he feels the firewall crumble and something comes onto the surfer. He's down in the mine, shattering stone with his trusty pickaxe when he feels it. The tear in the fabric of his home, the wrongness that immediately sinks into every bone in his body. Etho's pick clatters to the ground as he bolts back up through the mines. He's not entirely sure where he's headed, but he knows that he needs to get away. Where is his calm? He needs to get to Exuma. Exuma said to get to him if something was wrong, and something is very, very wrong. He manages to make it out onto the surface before the Watchers find him, and the sudden shock of void and cold and wrong is enough to make him stumble, tripping on something that isn't entirely there and pitching forward. At the last second, he manages to catch himself with his forearms and roll back into a crouch, pulling out his sword and wishing for the first time in a very long time that he used a shield. He knows it won't do much, but it's the thought that counts. The Watchers are terrifying, imposing beings with too many wings and eyes that blink and shift around them like orbiting stars, drilling into Etho with cold gazes. Etho stands on trembling feet and tightens his grip on the hilt of his sword. If he stabs a Watcher, will it bleed? He doesn't know if they can bleed. Green can bleed, his mind mutters distantly, but Green is, well, Green. This is not him, one of the Watchers hum, and they sound disappointed, frustrated. We chose the wrong ones. We chose wrong once again. Etho blinks and suddenly feels like he's been doused in cold water. They're searching for something, someone, and Etho knows exactly who that is. We'll keep going, a different Watcher says, and turns their eyes on the player, who shrinks back and raises his sword again. Although, I can see something odd about this one. He's not entirely human. The Watcher bends at the waist, the merest hint of a bow. Well met, being. Etho hesitates, then bows back. They're right. He is not human, though there's no word for what he is. And yet, despite his years, despite his long, long existence, he still trembles. He still fears, because somewhere while masquerading as a mortal, he's become one at heart. Etho was scared because even though there is no word for what he is, he knows to be afraid of the Watchers. What if we take him with us? One of the Watchers muse, and Etho's entire body tenses. His mind fills with blank static. His hands start shaking. He's frozen, terrified, like prey trapped under the claws of a predator. He hasn't felt like this in a long time. Perhaps this one will fare better than the first, the other agrees, and they reach for Etho, but he closes his eyes and cries out silently. Goodbye, B-dubs, and Exuma and Grian. Something pulses and pushes, and Etho's eyes snap open in time to see a bright light flare around him, shoving the Watchers back and away. It's only there for a moment, but they all see it, and something... It's only there for a moment, but when they all see it and understand what it is in the way, only beings like them can. A Watcher's magic. A protective aura that surrounds Etho like a shield and won't allow the Watchers to come close. Etho thinks back to when he left Hermitcraft. Grian gave him a hug, and while it was sudden, he had been touched by the gesture. Now he realizes the hug was also a means of putting the spell on him, as secretly enacted so he would be safe, even off-world and away from the hermits. That's what truly solidifies Etho's determination. His hands steady on the hilt of his sword, and his breathing steadies. Because even though he and Grian have a complicated relationship, even though they've barely seen each other, they're both too haunted to truly talk. Grian cares. He cares, and that means everything to Etho. So in one swift motion, he pulls several potions from his belt and smashes them on the ground. Mist and magic explode into colorful bursts, weakness and slowness and flash bombs colliding and filling the air. The Watcher's steady hum rising into a shuriken cacophony as they try and scramble away from the potions. At least we can poison them, Etho thinks wearily. But he's too busy fighting the dizziness to truly think about that. He stumbles away and falls to his knees, downing a regen potion to clear his head as he scrambles back and sprints for his house, the angry dissonance of the Watchers ringing in his ears. He bursts through the door and scrambles down the hall, crashing into walls as he fights to stay upright, potions and magic fighting their way down his throat and into his lungs. The regen is keeping the worst of it at bay, but inhaling and ingesting so many potions at once isn't good for anyone's health, even for someone like Etho. The communicator is where he left it, innocently sitting on the desk. He grabs it and punches the number, catching himself on the edge of the table and pulling in a raspy breath as the call connects. Etho, what's wrong? Exuma's concerned voice cuts through the fog in his brain, and he forces his mouth to make words. Code Purple, need your help to get off-world. He gasps out, raising his forearms against the table. I'll be fine once I get in the void, but I can't risk the firewalls with the state they're in. Already on it, Exuma replies immediately, and Etho could kiss him for reacting so calmly and not asking any questions. On the helmet, of course. There is a tense few seconds, and then suddenly Etho is tugged out by another force, gently guided through the shattered defenses and into the cool of the void. The Watcher's eyes snap to him for a split second, but by then it's too late, and Etho reconnects to the void. letting his playerness dissolve into stardust and mist as he blends into the nothing. He's there and he's not. One with the with the everything. The Watchers were right about Etho not being human. There is no name for what he is, not even for himself. He's been there since the beginning of things, and in a way, is so young. It's been years, though. He doesn't know how many since the little piece of void discovered it could be something more, and creates something a little different than what it had been. He doesn't remember who gave him the name Etho, but it's who he is now, and who he'll never be. He is player and he is not. He struggles to keep himself together and feels more grounded than he ever has. It's a strange state of being to be for the void, but he grows more confident by the day. Sometimes it's hard to forget that he's not like them. Sometimes it's hard to forget that he isn't mortal. But every day that goes by, when he fakes breathing and stimulating a beating heart, when he studies the players around him and learns from their mannerisms, he feels a little closer to them. Etho may be older than the oldest worlds, but somewhere between being void and pretending to be immortal, he's become one in his heart. The void learns to live, and so Etho does too. He pulls himself back together within Hermitcraft's walls, tugging stars and nothingness back together to coalesce into the puppet of a body he crafted as his own. Exuma is waiting at spawn and immediately wraps him into a hug. It's both unexpected and very welcome, the grounding touch of another player after being so ungrounded in the void. "I'm so sorry, I thought you took longer than you usually do. Are you okay? You just said..." "I'm okay, X," Etho says with a faint smile. And it's true. Rejoining with the void wiped all effects from his system, and the potions were merely a distant memory. "But only because of Grian. I owe him my life." Exuma steps back to give Etho some space, but the confusion in his tense stance is palpable. "What happened?" he asks, and Etho breathes out a puff of air. "He put some kind of protection spell on me before I left," he explains quietly. "The Watchers showed up on my world and they wanted to take me because I'm, well, you know. But they couldn't because of Green's magic. It gave me enough time to smash some potions and run for it." "He used his magic," Exuma echoes, and Etho can hear the smile in his voice. That's wonderful. He's becoming more comfortable, I think." "I just wish it was under different circumstances," Etho says, wincing as he remembers the Watcher reaching for him, the purple aura flaring to life. "Hey." Exuma's hand lands on his shoulder, and he's pulled back down to earth. "You're okay, yeah?" "Yeah," Etho parrots. "But what are we gonna do about the Watchers?" Exuma sighs and looks away for a moment. Etho watches silently, knowing it's slightly unfair of him to demand answers, but still desperate for them anyways. In all 5 seasons of Hermitcraft, Etho's never known Exuma to falter. He's the steady constant that all of them can depend on, and he always has a plan. "I don't know," Exuma says, so quietly it's almost lost in the ringing silence, and Etho realizes that they're all in deep trouble. And that's the end of chapter 26.